Yes.
Alrighty then. Another one.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Sound like Khalid there. Another one. Hey everybody, how we doing? Hope everyone's doing fine. Welcome to another edition of the Living Room. I think this is number 9 now. So thank you very much for joining us again. Hope you guys are having an enjoyable weekend, a great Sunday, and just ready for a good West Indian Caribbean chat. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
Good, my side as well.
Yeah, man. Tough but
Yes.
coping.
Tough
Coping.
but coping. Corbin, I see a change scenery there.
Yeah, man. The red room was getting me a little too stereotyped.
Oh, shoot.
I saw some of the
Oh,
watchers talking about Red Man in the red room. So
How did that make you feel, Mark? How did that make you feel?
Oh, we going in
man,
deep
I
here
come
now.
out of that later on, man.
Feelings.
You know what I mean? All about feelings. Joy, hope, love. That's my shirt today.
I love it. You're making a big statement there, man. You're establishing position quite early.
Yes, man. Believe in it. Usual day for me. Kitchen.
Kitchen. All right.
Bit of rice and peas. Roast chicken, some vegetables.
Aye.
Sweet potato in honey and cinnamon.
You're pushing the boat out when you start going down that road there, though. But
Yeah,
it sound interesting. I meant so fancy. I had a pork stew today, man.
Okay.
Still transitioning, I see.
Yeah. From
I only had
chicken.
a little bit. I had a little bit.
Because chicken is when you're coming down the transition list. When
That's
you
what I
go pork,
thought too.
you
Pork,
at
you
the
ain't
other
topping.
end.
You ain't topping mountain.
You going pork, you at the top. Pork is a relapse.
Yeah.
Pork is
But
a relapse.
listen,
Pork is
I
not transition.
have determined that from tomorrow, I gain. Tomorrow,
Wait. You
I
going-
have determined. Yeah.
Let's be specific. When you see you going,
No.
what do you mean?
I on the vegetables from tomorrow. One time.
Let's be specific. When you say tomorrow, you mean Monday?
Monday.
Or you mean sort of the proverbial tomorrow, the poetic tomorrow?
Someday.
You know them things that has got up in the shops. No credit. Come back tomorrow. And every day you come back tomorrow. No.
Yeah.
Look, tomorrow, the 29th of June, is when I am officially starting
All
my
right.
journey with the vegetables.
Well, I hope everyone, you heard it here first. 29th of
Absolutely.
June is when Mark going full vegetarian diet. That's all right. I here to support you, brother. I here
But
to
listen,
support you.
you was down on Bournemouth Beach this week.
You, Bournemouth Beach boy, that was something else, man. It's like, as we would say home, it's like people get there.
Federation.
Lego.
People get Lego, man.
Yeah.
Whoa, yeah, Bournemouth Beach was something else. I couldn't believe it when I saw it, actually. Well, I could, but then I couldn't.
Well, I think it just gave you an indication of how fed up
The
people.
sentiment. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
I was
yeah.
thinking as well. People just want to be out, and the weather these last few days has been too good.
Yeah,
You know?
man.
And I
Nice.
purposely say too good. It's generally not like this. If we were going to work as normal, it'd be raining. I'd be cycling to work in the rain. I'd be having all this nice blue sky,
Hot.
birds chirping. It is really hard to stay indoors.
But I was wondering whether I was be able to spot you in the crowd down there, man, because it was down south after all.
No. I stay far from that there, man. I stay far. But somehow people still thought that they were social distancing. You saw people being interviewed on television going, as long as people don't get too close.
Really?
But then when you look over the shoulders, you see the whole place packed like sardines, ants all across the sand. And you're like, I think that's happened already, though.
Yeah, social distancing is a relative term.
Nah,
I think
what-
so.
I decided this week to settle in for the long haul. I got all the equipment sent to me from work because it don't look as though we're going anywhere till Christmas. So I'm making myself comfortable, man. We at this for a longer period than anticipated.
I think so. But first, before we carry on, let's say hello to everybody. Nicole, I see you there. Marika, Karen, I see you. Karen, Mark, Karen, see you aren't ready yet with this vegetarian thing.
No, I saw that
so-
comment and I deliberately chose to ignore that because this might be a very difficult conversation this afternoon. I don't want to get too hot too quick.
Oh dear.
Oh, you need to go down Bournemouth and cool off.
Take a dip.
Take a dip, but I need a dip for real. But hey, everybody, thank you for joining us. As usual, we encourage you to share the feed on your pages. You know, if you're watching on Facebook, just hit share and share it to your page. If you're watching on YouTube as well, just hit share and share it to wherever, WhatsApp, Facebook, wherever it is that you're watching. We just encourage you to share with your friends and let them come in and join this conversation. But thanks again for joining.
But I also saw this week that the Caribbean is starting to open again. I don't know if you guys caught that.
Yeah, I saw Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados. I saw her her address to the nation and pretty much saying that Barbados is open for business, but always with the caveat of, but with certain protocols to ensure the safety for locals and for guests as well. I mean, as we say, you're between a rock and a hard place, really. It's a matter of when do you not. A lot of it still depends on what other countries are doing. The UK's have a list of countries who can actually come back people can come back from and not have to quarantine. So I'm sure there's a bit of a play in the Caribbean as well to get on that list so that people can actually travel to Barbados and different countries in the Caribbean as well.
Yeah, it was good to see actually. And, you know, it kind of took my mind back to when all of this was starting at the beginning, when we were saying, you know, the islands need to shut down at the same time so they can reopen at the same time. But in truth, they've done a much better job in the Caribbean than many other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to a bit of the discussion we were having when we looked at, say, CARICOM and whether or not they're able to get the message out in unity or not. There may be stuff that's going on behind the scenes within CARICOM as a unit that we actually don't know about, you know, but they're not shouting about it. So it seems as if the countries were not on the same page, but on the other hand, it seems as if they kind of were.
It takes me back to the conversation with Julian, because when we talked about CARICOM with him, he did outline there's a whole set of stuff that goes on, a whole set of cooperation and collaboration that is just not highlighted. Feels as though there's a bit of public relations that might need to be done there. But yeah, it's good to see. It's good to see the Caribbean reopening, and it'd be good to watch over the next few weeks what reopening really means.
Well, going back on that conversation with Julian, the one thing that I also took note of this week was Liat was back in the news. You know,
So that
Liat to be liquidated. I think it
Disappointing
was the
as-
head. Oh man, that was just really heartbreaking to see that. Yet again, we can't get this to work. But of course, you know, everybody's putting a stake in early to say, well, the headquarters has to stay here. Well, the Prime Minister of Antigua was saying that anyway.
Well, it is, you know me on this one. You get tired of talking about it because there you are, a huge entity like you are that means so much to the region, and already the conversation is gone. But we want the headquarters here. You know,
You can't get the thing to work, but you want the headquarters here. No mind, never mind the travel.
Exactly. No, people stranded all over the place. I saw comments of people stranded in different islands, can't get back home, needing to get back home, talking about refunds and stuff. But the argument from the leaders, it seems already, but we want the headquarters here. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not the discussion to have right now. The discussion to have is at a much higher level of how do we get regional travel to work, and do we want it
Absolutely.
to work, and let's put our heads together and make it work. Let it where the headquarters will be happen behind closed doors, but to bring it out in public, well, you saw the comments actually.
So listen, who we got in the living room today, man?
Well, before we get to the who is the topic that we're dealing with. So today we're talking about race relations in the Caribbean. Ooh. Now, what our viewers don't know is the marathon we had to run in order to put the show together today. But we'll get to some of that a little bit later. But race relations in the Caribbean is a lot more than just a black or white issue because, you know, in Trinidad and in Guyana, you've got Indians and blacks and you've got whites and blacks, or in some other islands, you're talking Creole, a whole bunch of stuff going on when it comes to, it's a lot more complicated than the quote unquote black and white conversation, so to speak. But today we have an audience favorite. we've heard you say many times after the first one of the shows that she was on, say, Naz, we love Naz, you should get her back. So today we have Naz. So everybody give Naz a welcome for when she joins. So we have Naz who's gonna join our conversation here. And just she's a Trinidadian living in Antigua. And she's gonna join our conversation here
Yes.
on race relations in the Caribbean.
Yes.
But it's gonna be an interesting topic. What do you guys think?
Well, listen, you mentioned there about the marathon that we put our shows together weeks in advance, and we are always trying to get the guests lined up. I don't think I've been through a week like this one that has just passed. And as I mentioned to you guys yesterday, I was so angry I cleaned my house from top to bottom, including all the windows.
He's not even lying. He's not exaggerating.
I was there saying to Sonia today, why are you so tired? Well, I just feel really tired. I don't understand. But trying to put this show together this week really took its toll, and it made me really angry. Actually, it really got on top of me in many ways. But we'll come to that in a bit.
We'll come to that in a bit. Phil, your thoughts? Initial thoughts?
I went through different thoughts. So I did reach out to some of my friends, but on reaching out to them, I started to recognize I actually don't have many white Barbadian friends.
And by many, you want to qualify what you mean by many?
None.
I don't have any.
Take off the
I
M.
even thought and I could count about 7 guys who I went to school with. We never kept in contact. And I was chatting with my circle from Combermere about this, and we just shared some thoughts. And I asked them the same question: how many of them have close white Barbadian friends that they went to school with, that they've kept in contact with, who've invited them to their house, who've not? And to my surprise, and this is what changed my sentiment a little bit this evening, the responses were very varied. And I'll probably talk about that. Those responses, if the guys will permit me. I'm sure they would.
Of course, but of course we're Bajans, and our experiences that we might draw upon is from Barbados, but we went further afield than Barbados to talk about this stuff.
I know we want to do that, but the truth is Barbados has the largest percentage population of whites in the Caribbean islands, which is an interesting dynamic.
Oh yeah,
dynamic.
So I think Barbados is always going to be at the sort of root or center of that discussion. And for other reasons as well, which I'm
going to say from a historical perspective, we always have been, but we're going to get into that. But let's bring in Naz into the conversation, and we know that our audience is going to give her a big welcome because, she's
Everybody
an
loves
audience
Naz.
favorite. Everybody loves Naz. That should be a show. Everybody loves Naz. So let's bring her in. Naz,
I don't know
how
how
are you?
interesting. I don't know how interesting the content will be for Everybody Loves Nas, but
Now you can make it work. You can make it
sounds
work.
like a show. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone just did a collective. You used to watch Cheers back in the day when Norm into the bar. Everybody used to go Norm. I think everybody just went Naz.
But listen, before we get into the serious business, I've got a question for you, Naz, because the West Indies men's team are currently here in England. And I have some expectations that the boys are going to deliver. Are my expectations in the right place?
I do believe so. I'm always an optimist when it comes to the West Indies team. Somebody was talking recently. I saw a tweet, I think it was about patience, and I said, I have the patience of Job, contrary to what my mother will think, because 1, I support the West Indies, and 2, I'm living in Antigua during the time of COVID.
Wow.
And there's not much here to do, and I'm having my patience tested in terms of not having a lot to do and not seeing my family. But ever the optimist when it comes to West Indies cricket. No, but I think the guys, they're gelling pretty well. They've been together since the start of June, which would have been about 3 weeks ago. And they're training. They had a little practice match between themselves last week. So they're getting ready, and I think, they're just waiting for the 8th of July to get that first day of the first test match started. And then it'll also...
Excellent.
I think it's gonna be good.
Good stuff.
And from when we last spoke, how have you been? I've seen, following you on Facebook, I've seen probably 362 of the 365 beaches in Antigua. I've seen more dishes. You have
Allegedly.
me hungry. I've seen so many dishes you've been sharing. Something new set for the lockdown period?
That's the show, you know.
Definitely something new. Mark, I mean, if you can come and show me how to make fried gizzards, if you can make that, even though I know you're going off meat.
Listen.
Fried
yeah.
gizzards, Mark?
Listen,
Gizzard?
listen,
Let me hear
listen,
this.
listen.
You don't want
Be-
Mark make nothing with you.
Listen. I'm glad you raised this because I actually had fried gizzards. I think it was Wednesday this week. You gotta boil
Yeah.
them first. That's the
Okay.
secret. The secret is to boil them before you fry them. That's the secret.
I will tell you,
Okay.
I used to only eat gizzards when my mom make it, right? Now in Trinidad they make it a kind of stew way where they cook it down with pepper and tomatoes and stuff, right? And you eat it with salt, what you all call salt bread, but we call it hops bread in Trinidad. But last year I went to Barbados and some of the girls from the West Indies women's team, they said, no, let's go by Granny's in
Granny's,
Oyston.
yeah.
Yeah,
the
man.
grannies,
Yeah,
yeah.
man. Yeah, man.
Because we went to Oystons for fish, but obviously it was ram out, so we had to wait until our table was free. And they were like, "All right, let's go across and get some necks and gizzards." So I said, "Okay, I can handle the necks. That's not the thing, but I don't really eat gizzards from any and anywhere because not a lot of people know how to make that. But let me tell you, that gizzard with a little bit of ketchup when it's hot, my word."
Yeah.
Granny's gizzards.
You're,
Yes.
you're a true
Yeah.
Bajan now.
I had my
And then
last set
somebody
last week.
Somebody told me that there's another spot behind the garrison, I think it is, that also makes gizzard really well. So next time on my next trip to Barbados, that is my next exploit.
All right.
Okay.
I would be careful with that one. Anyhow, I went.
In the daytime, Mark,
I was
I'm
gonna-
not going to wait
I was
till
going to say,
I'm not going to wait till night.
about midday when the sun is high. When the
That's
sun is
right.
high.
Now go away, over my head.
Inside joke. Man, Phil, come on, man. Listen, man. And again, before we get too deep into the show, you know, when we last spoke to you about COVID and the OECS response, things were in a slightly different place. How is it in Antigua now?
Antigua is in a little bit of a seesaw because last week our Minister of Health said we're essentially COVID free. Next day, 39 positive cases.
Oh boy.
Yes, and then just before we started this live broadcast here, I was reading on Facebook and Antigua Observer, which is the main media house here in Antigua. They reported that 4 hotel workers have tested positive, and the doctor that did the rapid testing, he confirmed it as well. And there are several tests that are still pending from Trinidad that they sent to CAFA, plus I think what he did as well. So it's a little bit of a concern that the numbers are just spiking, but Antigua has opened back its international borders. And what is of concern is, I mean, I know this is not the topic today, but as we're just quickly going through it, what is of concern is that the government basically admitted last week that they're not exactly sure how many people came into the country because I don't know if
dear.
there was
Right.
not proper record keeping. And private planes have been landing with people here in Antigua, and there is no data being collected, so they don't know how many people came via private plane nor left via private plane. So that's a little bit worrying here. And then, well, obviously there's Bacchanal with Liat now. So technically I'm stranded in Antigua because Caribbean Airlines has not started back flying
Yeah, we started
in the
back,
region.
Yeah.
If I were to get out of Antigua, I mean, I can't go home to Trinidad because the border is still closed there.
Yeah.
But if I were to go home to Trinidad, it will have to be via Miami until another Liat comes into play. But I think it's going to go all the way back to basics with that because, as Andre said, is already a squabble about who is going to be the headquarters for Liat and who's going to be the majority shareholder. And I think we need to really look at that before we start another airline, as well as look at the taxes implemented in interregional travel, because the taxes are sometimes more than what the actual ticket is worth.
It would be good if they could put the people at the heart of the service to start with rather than the politics, you know? Start with the service you want to deliver for the people and then work your way out. But, you know, this is the region.
The people and then the region as a whole, from an economic and from a necessity perspective of travel that needs to happen intra-regionally.
Yeah.
I can't believe that the conversation is started with where the headquarters is going to be. I mean, if that's the opening gambit, I'm sorry.
I mean,
we're doomed.
just yesterday I was having a conversation with one of my friends from Barbados, and that's exactly what we were talking about. The fact that, you know, you want to start this new entity, but you're going back with an old argument to start the new entity. So how can we get anywhere if you have basically just a circle and a cycle of the same arguments all the time?
Same thing.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I definitely know Auntie Mia is not going to back down with wanting change and seeing a new way forward for our regional airline.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
Now, listen, we want to thank you for coming to join us again. And you know, one of the things I really appreciate about you, we can always say, let's phone that, and we know there will be a receptive conversation. Now, this show today is all about race relations across the Caribbean.
Yep.
And perhaps I can share why I got so upset, as I mentioned in the opening. Now, like Phil said, I don't have a lot of white friends. In fact, I think the first white person's house that I went to was when I first moved to England, and I've lived in Barbados more than I have lived in England. I have never been to a white person's house in Barbados, full stop. It has never happened. I went to school with one white guy, and, you know, as soon as school was finished, that was it. I've never seen him since. But, you know, I have acquaintances, and I reached out to one this week, and I had a great hope that we would be having this conversation this evening. And of course, that didn't materialize. And he said, look, I'm sorry, but I don't want to take part. And it really made me think a lot about where we are. And I speak here from a Barbados context. But even though, you know, we were reaching out to folks across the Caribbean, but there was a similarity coming back in the response. We don't want to. And nobody was prepared to say, I want to be part of that dialogue, particularly the white folks across the region. And it just made me really upset that we have to constantly be trying to have a conversation amongst ourselves, and that isn't the solution. I don't know what your view was, Phil, when you did your reach over the course of the last couple of weeks.
So I think the guys I reached out to, again, one of the guys, and I'm hoping that he'll come on again. I just know him from work, from years ago, but he has some technical difficulties with joining. But even knowing the background, our conversations about it were tentative. Because to be honest, it is not. It is like a conversation packed in compressed gas. You know, it could become a very volatile conversation. It's probably not a safe conversation. But it is a courageous conversation. Mm-hmm. So my from a sentimental perspective, I can get why people might not want to have that conversation, especially here live on Facebook. However, I'm hoping that what we can do today is sort of establish a framework for having that conversation in a courageous way, right? Mm-hmm. Because we talk about race a lot in the Caribbean. We talk about race a lot in our living rooms. But we talk about each other and not with. You know, I can't think of times where I've sat down with one of my white friends or colleagues or associates and had a conversation about race. We'd have had a lot more sort of professional conversation, or situational conversation. And I would also say it's on my part as well. And that's the sort of conclusion that I drew with my friends today as we were discussing it. We said, you know, a lot of the guys that we went to school with, I went to school at Combermere, and Combermere is an older secondary school in Barbados, so you would have had a few more white people going to school there. But I would not have reached out easily. You know, there was almost an unspoken understanding that we go to school together. And unless you had a real social commonality, which was probably where you lived, the sort of stuff you did, it wouldn't continue. So
and even with that, and even with that, it might not as well.
I don't know. I've never tried. So that's where I am. I'm sort of on the fence with this. That it's something I'm prepared to put a bit more effort in. So in as much as I would have liked these guys to come on, I also did some reflection on myself as well, and to think of how can I actually reach out and be a bit more intentional? How could I have been in those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think communication is the main thing, and communication is not a one-way thing. I think I mentioned to you guys over this season, even as we look at the conversation on the news, the conversation within churches, the conversation in the office space, a lot of it has been one-way traffic of black and brown people talking about their experiences. Well, that's not really a conversation. That's just me telling you something. The conversation is then you speaking back to me with understanding and perhaps telling me your experiences as well.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I think sometimes the conversation is never had because it's a difficult one. But you know, it's a difficult one for the person who's expressing their experiences as well. In some cases, recounting sometimes where the experiences were extremely unpleasant. But I think it says a lot where people aren't willing to engage for whatever reason. And we can probably get to some of those reasons a little bit later. But for whatever reason, why folks aren't willing to engage on this. Naz, I'm curious, so because obviously in Trinidad we know the makeup is slightly different as it is probably in Guyana to the rest of the Caribbean. What's the conversations like in Trinidad, even before you get to your experiences in Antigua? But what are the conversations like in Trinidad?
I think for the most part, people of my generation and probably younger, they're looking to break that mold that has been there with the separations between Afro-Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians, because from time immemorial, it's been Afro-Trinidadians versus Indo-Trinidadians. It was unheard of in the 50s and the 60s that, and even the 70s, that Indo-Trinidadian and Afro-Trinidadian would get married and stuff like that. I mean, you could probably count them on one hand, how many marriages like that, interracial marriages that they've had from that time come forward. And I think probably within maybe the 70s, 80s come forward, it's getting to be a little bit more, and I would use the word tolerant in a general term, because that's what a lot of people have become, tolerant. Given the fact that tolerance is one of our watchwords in Trinidad and Tobago, discipline, tolerance, and production, and the fact that we who have struggled against colonialism and the British for so long and being subjected to various hardships and stuff like that, the fact that we can have that segregation between ourselves is something that still amazes me until now. For the most part, it is something that has been progressing on a positive level in Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, it's been mainly with the younger generation. I'm sure with the older heads, you will still find that prejudice and that that racial vibes and tension with between them. But it's something that I think is making a lot of progress in Trinidad. And recently they had a Black Lives Matter protest in Port of Spain, and the thing is, it showed how diverse Trinidad and Tobago is, because while it was mainly Afro and Indo-Trinidadians, there you still had the odd smaller racial groups that had representatives there showing their support. And one of the things that I always tell people, yes, I'm Indo-Trinidadian. When I went to school, I don't think there was any white person that attended the school that I went to. It was mainly Afro and Indo-Trinidadians. You might get the odd white Trinidadian when they came into the school to do A-levels. But other than that, from Form 1 to Form 5, it was virtually Afro and Indo-Trinidadians. And even till now, some of us have still remained in contact. And I always tell my friends, I said, I might not share the same experiences as an Afro-Trinidadian being racially victimized, whether it is in Trinidad or if they went to the US, or an African-American, or a Afro-Bajan, right? I might not share that same experience as an Indo-Trinidadian. However, For us to start any sort of change on anything, there has to be dialogue, and people like myself needs to be involved in it to stand up and say it's wrong, regardless of whatever race you belong to. I will defend you just as I would expect that you defend me, and try to get equal rights for all of us. So I think.
Oh, Karen,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, I
No, I was just
going
gonna.
go on, Phil.
Well, I was just gonna say what you said is stands out for me about the generations, where you said it and it makes me wonder: is there a risk of us coming at this, because we're now starting to get up there a little bit,
Slightly.
some of us more than others. But is there a risk of us having a conversation that's really generational, whereas people who are, let's say, 15, 20 years younger than us actually don't feel as though there's a need for this conversation because they've come up in a different world and they have a totally different perspective on race and how people interact and engage. Whereas from our time of growing up, we were a lot more integrated than our parents' time, from an economic perspective, from a social perspective, from an educational perspective, from a professional perspective. And I guess the generation coming up after us, even more so.
But I don't know if I don't know if I see that being reflected in the reality though, Phil, of that generation that is coming, because
Okay.
I still, when I observe, okay, and as I said earlier, I don't have a lot of friends, but I can only go on observations, and I still see very clear
Talking about
lines of
face.
demarcation. All right, I see very, very clear lines where, if what you're saying is that you think the generation coming could be bringing something different, I don't really see it. I still see them and us. I don't see a conversation happening across the divide to try and bridge the gap. And I put this question up on the screen here from Kieran because I thought it was very interesting, this whole issue of emotion and defensiveness. Now, look, if we are going to bridge the gap, we're going to have a conversation, many conversations, okay? Because this is not something that is going to be solved very quickly. And you have to look at where we are now and everything that's going on around the world. If we can't have this conversation now, when can we have it? Would be the question.
I think that's the thing for me, is that it seems like we're always waiting for the quote unquote right time.
Yeah.
And the right time really never really happens, because it's like, when is the right time to have the conversation? Because it feels like whenever there's the right time, is then, okay, so how are we going to have this conversation? Let's have it outside the public arena. Let's have it on the quiet. Let's have it where no one can, and let's set some rules around it. So don't challenge me, don't judge me, and all of a sudden the conversation becomes almost nothing. So I'm one that says, look, have the conversation now. And the thing is about it is that, and Phil, you talk about generations, but the generations after us really are not interested in whether or not the time is right. The right time is now.
Yeah.
And I think, and I see this in my daughter, Mark, you saw it in Kyle and stuff as well.
Absolutely.
And I see the kids of my peers, and stuff, their kids are like that. And then what you said then about generations also is that I wonder if you're really seeing it, because as you know, when I watched a podcast recently, which was actually a podcast of a Caucasian Bayesian, and they were having this conversation amongst themselves. But one of the things that he said is, his granny told him, don't do X. But then he always prefaced it by saying, but my granny is not racist, but she said don't do X and I complied. So it's coming down.
Yeah.
It's being handed down. And it's going on, because if self-preservation becomes a thing, and as humans, self-preservation always kicks in, it's a case of, okay, to self-preserve for me and for the next generation of me, then I must behave in this way. And I think that's why you see things have prevailed for so long in places like Barbados, and I'm assuming across the region as well, considering that no one was actually willing to come on also. I think that's why, is that self-preservation kicks in and then everyone just complies because of the influence that older generation still has.
I would agree with you to an extent where the upcoming generations, I mean, I'm one of those that is a frequent user of social media and the various social media platforms. So Twitter, I joined TikTok to the behest of my friends.
TikTok.
Okay,
You
so
done
my
with the cool kids now, man.
Dancing with the food.
I will tell you on
Do the whoa. Is that the whoa? I don't know. Is that the whoa?
It's called the war.
Is the whoa? You see?
Gosh.
No,
Oh,
my
the
TikTok,
whoa.
my,
The whoa.
my
Okay,
TikTok
right.
videos are more like about various parts of Antigua and stuff. Like when I drive to different parts of the island, that's what I show on TikTok. Not my culinary skills, which I'm still working on. But
No.
no. So I mean, like when I look at TikTok and you see some of these people jumping onto hashtags, even on Twitter jumping onto hashtags and stuff like that, you have to wonder, are they doing it for a genuine interest to see change and to bring about discussion and change, or are they doing it because it's a cool thing to do? And you will get 5,000 likes or a million likes or 5,000 followers. What, and according to Chronics, do it for the love, don't do it for the likes, right? You're doing it because you really want to change the situation and not bring about likes and clicks on your profile.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we really need to engage the younger generation, because how many of them actually understand what is the severity of the situation that is happening now, which is basically the straw that breaking the camel back for hundreds of years, even thousands of years going back into civilization, because it's not just a racial thing. There are cultural issues that have happened where there's always a ruling class. There's always a ruling class that has been taking advantage of the working class, so to speak. So right now, yes, we're dealing with Black Lives Matter, right? But the thing about it is we have to understand that it's just not a fad that is going through. It's just not a phase that the world is going through, but it's something that needs to be continuous.
Yes.
And like for me, coming from Trinidad, right? Growing up in an Indo-Trinidadian home, you would hear comments from the older generations, and this is one thing that I can draw upon from my religion, right? In Islam, it teaches you that you do not look at a person's race, or you do not look at how much wealth they has, but you have to look at the character and the level of religiousness. Now, when I say level of religiousness, it have some that might wear the hijab like me, but they're not good Muslims because they do wrong things, right? But the thing about it is you look at how they how seriously they take their religion and how their character is in terms of how they treat people. So you can be blue, green, whatever color, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. And a lot of people who proclaim to be, the best Muslims or whatever it is, they use a cultural stereotype where you have to have your children marry off to another Indian. It doesn't matter if that person might be abusive towards, the son or the daughter or whatever it is, but the fact is they're Indian. So you have to keep it like that. So it comes back where it's a discussion that has to go forward. And, according to Andre and Philip, is something that you just have to try to hope that the future generations understand it. Maybe because we see it and we've actually experienced it, because the generation just below me and maybe 3 below us, I should say, not just me, but us, because we're relatively, according to a form, we all get grouped into the same age group. So tick between 35 and whatever it is, or
Let's just
25.
say we're seasoned. We're seasoned. We're a little bit seasoned.
Right. So we all belong to the same age bracket, and we more or less share somewhat of the same experiences. But the thing about it is, this younger generation, we have to really engage them and get them to understand it's not something that you do for the popularity of it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with what Philip and Andre said, that, it's something that we have to continuously do.
Yeah, I think time. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I was just saying, coming back to the point of social media, there's something I've been thinking about a lot. And it's not just social media, but it's also in the corporate world and sometimes in churches as well, and other social groups. Our conversations are becoming so much more transactional as opposed to relational. So a transactional conversation is, You know there are certain things that you expect to hear. There's certain procedures that you follow. There's certain rules. There's certain things that you're going to say, and you know you'll get a reward. Certain hashtags that you're going to follow, and you know you're going to get a sort of sorry, you know you're going to get a certain amount of likes and so on. That is completely transactional, right? So even you can have that conversation going on, and people can walk away feeling as though they've been fulfilled. They've gotten the rewards that they expect. But a relational conversation is really about getting to know people, getting to understand why people are the way they are, and not just reacting and responding to things that people have put up in those 256 characters or 260 characters in Twitter, for example. But really digging deeper and understanding why are people the way they are. I have this concept that I'll share about. I've stopped calling people racist. I decided that I'm going to objectify racism and treat racism as an object similar to a virus, right? And people can be infected in different ways, affected in different ways by racism. So and the other side of that is, if someone has COVID, for example, I don't call them COVIDists. I refer to them as a person infected by COVID. And because of that, it means that we are a lot more intentional in trying to help them heal and to trying to eradicate it. So my thinking is, if we start to objectify racism as a virus, as a mental virus, and actually a sickness of the mind, could we actually get together and try to eradicate it?
I don't know. Would be my my simple. And I'll tell you why. I think in order to try and eradicate it, you gotta first of all understand where we're starting from and where we're coming from, right? And this is the conversation that everybody shies away from. Now we talked about Barbados, we talked about legacy, we talked about history. Now, what we don't realize is actually Barbados is a very small, tiny island in the Caribbean Sea, has a very significant and fundamental place in how we have arrived at the way that we behave today, actually. Now, many people might not even appreciate that. But if you go all the way back to 1661 and the Barbados Code, Barbados is a very small nation, right? Was the first place to have an act around how whites treated the slaves that they governed. It started in Barbados.
And mind you, this is probably just over 50 years of when the first settlement started in Barbados.
Yeah. So when we talk, Phil, about trying to get to healing, right? What is really intriguing about trying to get to healing is helping not just ourselves as victims to understand how we've arrived here, but also helping the other side to understand, but this is why you behave the way you do. This is why you have the privilege that you have, until you're able to have a constructive and mature dialogue on where we came from and the behaviors that came out of the code. And, you know, I found this quite fascinating when we were doing the research for the show, because you wouldn't think that a small nation like Barbados, but obviously because of its place with the British and because of colonialism and because of sugar and because of the slaves there in Barbados, Barbados was very, very influential in exporting something long before we exported sugar that has at its root the way we behave and relate to each other today. And until we get onto that and start to have a conversation about it, we are unlikely to really get to a mature discussion.
And it's a case. I understand what Philip was saying as well of treating it like a disease, but Phil know my thoughts on these kind of things.
Actually, I don't.
You do. I just didn't hear it say it today, but you know. But I know, to be fair, I give some credit where that's due. Yes, there's a philosophy that I can speak to. The difference I would say is is with a disease, or even if it's of the mind or an actual disease in the blood or what have you, is that usually there's a diagnosis and you actually go somewhere and someone wants to be treated, or someone is forced to be treated if it's a case of something severely mental, where they don't have a choice. In this case, people have a choice to engage. And what we've been seeing is people have exercised that choice, not now, because this is something that a conversation could have been had a long time ago, about over hundreds of years. And I'm talking predominantly about, the black-white conversation, obviously. But it's an interesting one. And I saw what someone was saying there about cooler heads prevail. But what has never happened in this context is something that's happened in South Africa, in Uganda, in Zaire, and where people have had serious ethnic cleansing. And that is, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committees. And that didn't happen on the cool heads.
No.
That didn't happen 50 years later. That didn't happen 100 years later. That never waited for the right time to have it. And it happened, it was difficult conversations. I mean, you saw some of the videos and stuff floating around. These conversations, man, I tell you,
Heartbreaking, man.
I couldn't have some of these conversations.
Yeah.
But there are people coming out and saying, I did this. I did this to my neighbor. I did this to my friend. I did this to my family. And when they had to go down the list of things they did. And when you listen to young boys and old men and women speaking and going through the list of things that they do, is you had to go through that. And then at the end, and is everything perfect yet? No. But at least people have gone through that process. And you see countries like Eritrea and stuff now rebounding. You see Uganda rebounding as well. South Africa, similar thing, still has issues, of course. They're not saying that once you have those, all issues would disappear. But it's never having that conversation. And of course people will say, but it wasn't me, it was 200 years ago. Yes, we understand that. But it's having the understanding that the things, as we probably will look at similarly in a minute, that were enacted in the slave code affected not only black people, but actually affected white people as well.
That's right.
And while we are trying to still, all these years later, mentally and physically dig ourselves out of that system, the same thing is happening. The thing is, we acknowledge that that's happening, but others don't want to accept that that's happening. Until that happens, we can't have a real proper conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I want to challenge that a little bit. We don't know if others have not acknowledged that, right? Because again, this is the thing. We have these conversations about and not with, right? So I think that's one thing.
But until you have it with, you have not acknowledged it. That's my point.
Okay, fair enough.
My point is, until you come and talk to me
Yeah.
and acknowledge it, until your actions show that you've acknowledged it,
Yes.
you have not acknowledged it. I don't
Okay.
care how much talking you do over there.
Yeah.
You have not acknowledged it. Is it?
Okay.
It's like if you have a toothache, you know the toothache there, but until you go see the dentist to rectify it, you're not going to,
See?
address the situation.
Absolutely. Now is on the same page as me. Get the doctor. But I was just going to support something you said. Although I challenge what you said, is going to support what you said there, Andre. About
Start with that first.
about it not being a safe conversation. There's going to be emotion involved in it. I don't know if any of y'all have ever cooked with a pressure cooker.
I cooked with one today, man.
Just
What was in the
units.
pressure cooker?
Don't want to bother with these two. Yeah, but you know what? You can't just take off the valve quickly. It's gonna fly off and everything's just gonna go all over the place. You gotta be easy with it, right? That's not
200 years though.
Yes, and maybe that valve is slowly released, right?
Okay.
This is not a transactional conversation, as I said. Those things happen quickly. This is relational, and we do have to cross that line and get to know each other a lot better.
But I'll say this. If you knew that under that pressure in there, the peas, the burning, you would try and get off the valve as quick as possible. So, in this slow valve that you're talking about, people are dying. People are economically years behind. Education systems have been built to not acknowledge certain things and lift different people's up. You know, there's a system that has gone into place while we are easing off that pressure to ensure that you don't achieve. So my view is now is the time that the valve just get ripped off, and if it blow up the whole kitchen, that's all right. We'll fix it back.
No,
Easy the valve and the peas burning, Phil.
Exactly.
I would just take the pot off the. I would just take it off the heat. To be honest.
No, but in that instance, I agree with Andre's analogy where you need to have an immediate reaction to it. You can't just you can't just shut off the fire and then just, take a spoon or whatever it is and then easily turn the valve. It's something where I think it's reached critical levels now. And the fact that I would say our generation is the one that is championing this cause. And the fact that we're having such a positive effect right now, I think it's really time to rip the band-aid off and do it. I mean, albeit you need to do it in how I would say, not in a non-violent manner, compared to some of the things that you've been seeing in terms of, I mean, on both sides. But the thing is, it needs to be addressed, and it's not something that we can leave for the next generation, because as we said earlier, we don't know if they really understand what the ramifications of these racial issues and racial tensions are.
On the next generation, I would give them a little bit more credit, because I think we're the ones who have not grown up in the 250 character era. We're now learning it. We still, I'll be honest, I went on Twitter for 5 months. I thought this is absolute rubbish, and I get rid of my account. I've never gone back on Twitter again.
Okay, Andre,
So-
I'm on the lower spectrum of our age group, so I understand 200.
Me too.
You wanna hit me hard there, though. But anyway. So, and then TikTok, well, I can't even get, see, I call it the wow instead of the war. So there you go. So I got it wrong. But I think when I talk to my daughter and talk to some of her peers, they kind of get it. The thing for them, though, is that, again, we're the same analogy I bring, but there's a system that's built up around them that's almost stopping them from getting behind. And we're the ones who now got to say, okay, I see the interest. And in some cases, unfortunately, we got to go educate ourselves. I had to educate myself
Absolutely.
deeper.
Yeah.
The Barbados
Absolutely.
Slave Act, I had 2 pages of that probably in a history book in 5th form, and that was it. Then you turn the page and you went on to colonialism and independence and everything else, and you forget everything else. It was through discussions with the guys this week that came back, and through Phil was like, oh, actually, that's true. We forget all about that. And then actually now thinking about it. So it's things like that. I know I always quote Rex Netherford because he's my guy from Jamaica, where he always says, you cannot know where you're going. I paraphrase, I know. But you don't know where you're going until you have a full understanding of where you came from.
Yes.
Because that's when you know that you don't repeat the mistakes. That's where you know you have the motivation to go forward.
But you see, this is where that code is so important, because I don't think that we as I said before, we speak as the victims, okay? But that's only one side of the story. If you can't have a conversation about how you have arrived in a privileged position, or how you behave in society today because of the way that your ancestors passed certain traits or passed on certain behaviors, you have to first of all recognize that it is the reality. Okay, it is part of the reality of who you are, and it's not that we are saying we want to persecute people or drag them over the coals, but we have to have a mature dialogue about how we have arrived here, and give acknowledgement to look. A lot of this went badly wrong, but we have to start to move towards fixing this, because we can't put the burden of this on our young generation, who themselves will have their own challenges to deal with.
That's
I
right.
agree, Mark, because reconciliation is really it's a journey that comes from 2 directions. It's a journey of and using a very Christian term here, repentance, but also a journey of forgiveness. It's a journey of mercy, but also a journey of admittance. And if you don't have those crossroads coming together, reconciliation is just a dream.
Yeah.
Those different parts of the system have to work
Yeah.
together, but they don't talk by, again, being in our separate corners
No.
Exactly.
and spinning the valve too quickly.
And I think we have to challenge ourselves, because this is not just about looking across the divide and saying what you guys have done or what has happened in another rate. We have to challenge ourselves around how we also need to change. And some of that is going to be very, very uncomfortable. But this is the uncomfortable season that we're going through right now. And we're just going to have to, bear it and carry it.
There's no conversation you can have around this, and and when we say racism, it's not, as I keep saying, it's not just a black-white thing. Obviously, we're from the Caribbean, so that's the one that we kind of relate to most. But across the world, I said this week, the thing that if we can solve, that I think the world over would be in such a better place, is racism at its core. It's one group of people, feeling that they're better than another group of people. There's, when you look across the world, there's so much of that at the root of wars, at the root of famine, at the root of hunger, at the root of so many things, that if we can get to that, that the world will be a better place. But there's no comfortable conversation that you're gonna have.
You can't. No.
About that. And any conversation you have with that is going to soon become uncomfortable, and there will not be cooler heads. Eventually there will be, if you continue with the conversation. But what you need is someone not to get so upset that they exit the conversation.
Absolutely. You have to give people. You have to give people a vision, and this is the thing with courageous, or anything that you do that's courageous. The reward has to be very, very clear and agreed up front, that people know, if I go through this, there is a reward here that's substantial and that's worth it. It's not about safety and sugarcoating and having cushions around this conversation. It's really about having hard benches, hard seats, and going through it. Because, at the end of this, there's a reward. We're going to be better as a nation. We're going to be better as a people. We're going to be able to be more creative. And there's a bit of work from a professor called John Powell, where he has this diagram about diversity brings anxiety. And then after anxiety, you have this narrative from leaders. And based on how leaders behave, you can go in two directions. This thing can either explode and break, or you can have bonding and bridging between affinity groups. But the thing, when I looked at that, I said, that is true. It does require leadership. But where I want to see leadership go is that we stop making diversity lead to anxiety. Why does that have to be a rule? Why do we have to condition ourselves to think that because there is difference, it has to lead to anxiety, right? It potentially it does, but I think we have convinced ourselves of that, rather than that being a natural response to difference.
But don't you think that is what has borne out itself historically? When people have examined the issue, that what they have seen conclusively is that the next step on is anxiety. When you start to uncover these conversations, don't you think that would have been borne out historically?
I think something like what we just talked about, the Barbados Slave Code, is an unnatural introduction of that dynamic, right? It pitted people against each other. It was purposely created to segregate and say, this class of people are less and this class of people are more. And to be honest, I even check myself and how that narrative affects me and affects how I relate to my children as well, and how I relate to my other circle of white friends and colleagues and leadership and so on here in the UK. Because most of my conversations here in the UK, outside of my family circle, would be primarily with white colleagues and friends, right? But what I've found coming out of Barbados, there was, and it's difficult for me to talk about this because I do sense in myself, and I'm not going to generalize all Black Afro-Barbadians, but I do think there was an inferiority perception that I took with me, right? That I found I had to deal with that.
Yeah.
And even in the way I chat with my children as well, there's still a lot of shh, 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 whenever we're out in public. And then when I look around me, all the other kids are
Free.
just happy and free and shouting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this puts them at a disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to grow up to be quieter in a culture where that sort of quiet wallflower nature does not get you anywhere,
It doesn't.
No.
right? And this is the structural, the systemic, and the perceptual things that we need to deal with, and we need to
But
straighten up.
again, this goes back to again understanding where that came from. Now, and just going to put up a little bit of the slave code there, so as well to folks to understand what I'm saying. I'm not going to read it. I think people can read it themselves. But you got to understand where that came from over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, do you live in this place? No, of course not. But can anyone say even today that having this be the code of the beginning of Barbados, so to speak, and something that we actually exported across the world as well? You see there's 1696. We focus on the USA a lot, but guess what? Where the USA got a lot of their stuff from that was enacted in Barbados, from the Caribbean, if we put it that way, because you can see Jamaica there is 1664, and then we see going forward there in 1772 and but it's like when you understand where that came from, and I completely get you, and this is something that I've constantly said a lot, that I've had to check myself. While I might be extrovert to many people, I'm also slightly a bit of an introvert as well. But I never really lack for confidence, so to speak. I mean, I might do, but sometimes, but not really. But one of the things that come in here that I had to deal with quite a lot is the fact that where I thought I might have been the big extrovert in Barbados was nothing compared to where I needed to be outside the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And when you can then be out and then look back, you realize, whoa, we're really doing our people a disservice. We're doing our kids a disservice. And, and to your point, the same thing for me, Philip, it really, the way how I speak to my children is very, very, very different. I've often grown up in Barbados. So here you got to work twice as hard to achieve something and all that kind of stuff. I never say that to my kids. I never say that. And the reason why I never say that is because while as an adult, I know what I'm saying, a child is hearing something different. Yeah. And a child is hearing, I am less than. Yeah. And what you are reinforcing is something that's been from 1661. And you're unwittingly reinforcing that in the generation after you.
Yeah.
So I never say that to my kids, and I never say it to anybody. Every time I talk to people, I say, do not say that to your children, because you might think you know what you're saying, but they're internally something different. And guess what? You internalize something different too when you first heard it. And that's why you're now trying to break it. It's just that you now realize what it is and you're trying to break it. So I think it's always important to understand where that's come from and break it. Now, on the flip side, as I said, just as the things that went up there impacted us as Black and Brown people and even Indo-Trinidadians as well, and Afro Caribbean people across the region, this has also impacted European Caribbean people. Yeah. And you can't just look at this and say, well, whoa, this is what Afro and Indo-Caribbean people had to deal with. Yes, it is. But guess what? This very system and way of thinking and the way how they see Black and brown people has also filtered throughout the generations. And you can't have that conversation until people look at that and go, that is true. That doesn't mean that you are racist. That doesn't mean that but it still impacts the way how you deal and how you relate to people. It didn't only impact us. Yeah. Let's put it that way. It impacted you too. But you've got to be willing to accept that, and then we can have a conversation.
It comes back to your point of acknowledgement and accepting of the fact that this existed, and it existed before us. It was not caused by us nor by our parents, but it's something that just how us as a generation and generations before us and generations to come have all, so to speak, inherited this treatment and burden, if you want to call it that. It was derived from your ancestors. So acknowledge that. And then from then, once you poke that one little hole of acknowledgement, it will start to drip, and then eventually the entire bucket will burst, and you know that prejudice and that segregation will come out. And I laugh sometimes, and I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but as much as people in the Caribbean say, oh, we live together and we don't we live together as one and we're all family and this, and we all share the same experiences, the fact that there are still people in our society that doesn't accept nor acknowledge that some of us have been and are being treated differently, nor are they willing to stand with us to change those treatments and the perceptions. It boggles my mind that in 2020 we still have people like that. And what you were saying, Andre, that when I spoke about me worrying about the generations to come after, and you said, will you see a different reaction from your daughter? My take on that is she has a father like you, who are educated, and you have the vigor to want to execute that change for the upcoming generation. So she is educated because you are educated. And I think this is something in the general Caribbean that, and as I said in our discussion with the OECS when we spoke about that whole impact of COVID, and I said, we as a Caribbean people, we love to talk more than we love to act.
Yes.
Right? And until some of us don't act, and whether the act is just coming out and supporting one another, and me willing to stand with you, Andre, and you, Philip, and you, Mark, and say, I am with you, no matter how much and how informed the other generations are, if it is that they're not educated, because educated and informed are two different things.
Yeah.
Because you could have information, but you don't know what to do with information if you're not educated how to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Look,
And I think that is where going forward, and it's something that we need to start to change from our school curriculum. Because I will tell you this, from Form 1 until I graduated, A levels in Form 6, Caribbean history has been about sugarcane plantations, slavery, indentureship, maroons in Jamaica, riots throughout the Caribbean, whatever it is, independence, exactly, independence, end of slavery, all these things, right? But the thing about it is, nobody have really. We know that there has been racial issues because of these things, but nobody has really delved into it.
No.
I mean, it's something, even at university, it's not something that has a course by itself to deal with how do we go forward as a people and as a region with what
Good
we
point.
know into what it should be. And I think it's something that we need to start to look at from that aspect, because I will not lie to you. There was a history course that I had to do at university. I did it as an elective because it was Caribbean history and it was easy to get my 3 credits.
Nice.
But I probably used to go to class every other week because I was fed up of learning the same thing. Sugarcane plantations and who had this amount of slaves and where they came from and how they allocated these slaves. But for me, that was nothing interesting. Right? And I think it's a discussion that needs to happen with our educators going forward. It's not just something that the average person has power, but what do we do with that power if we're not educated how to use it? And I think that is where it needs to start with the education system going forward.
Well, here's how you put that education link together.
Hold on one second, Mark. Let me just jump in here a sec. Okay, guys. So I know this is a very hard discussion that we're having. You're right. But it's a discussion that we need to have. amongst ourselves and then with and wider communities as well. So feel free to jump in the comments, feel free to share, feel free to, get people to come and join the conversation as well. Because the more of us that are having the conversation, the better. We reacted to some comments before, and we're happy to react to a whole bunch of them as well. So we just hope that you as hard as the conversation might be, get your friends, share it with them, share it on your pages, and get them to come and join the conversation as well. So thanks a lot. Go ahead, Mark.
Here's how you make that link. Because when you look at the Barbados Code, and as I was reading through this week, something really struck me, right? There was no standard for diet, no standard for housing, and no standard for working conditions.
No.
Fast forward to 2020. Look anywhere in the world where you see black people populate cities or wherever they gather. Look and see what are the three biggest significant issues that affect them in terms of opportunity. You can probably go back to those three. The way we eat and feed ourselves, our exposure to employment and working conditions, and housing. It is all rooted in this history.
And I'll put education in there as well.
Yes.
As a fourth, and education.
So you can't detach what has happened and its significance and its legacy in terms of where we have arrived at today. But sometimes we don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation because we feel as though it isn't moving us forward, but it is.
But and it even impacts us today. And two things. First, I'll start here. In Barbados. The fact that go in here, man. The fact that we actually having a debate about this in 2020, a debate. And Lord bless Auntie Mia, as Naz referred to her, and many people do. Great leader, and I think she'll be even greater. But there's no need to have a referendum on this. I'm sorry. Not if we are, a Barbados that's charting our own course, that a Barbados that, is willing to accept our past, accept our history, but we decide what we celebrate. Yeah. I'm sorry, no amount of Virgin Atlantic planes or British Airways planes or people coming to take pictures of Nelson would make me keep Nelson there. Nelson need to go. Put him in the museum. You can talk about him. He's in the history books. All the history that guys do for A-level at university, talk about the British Empire. Nelson all over it. You don't need a statue in a prime location in Hero Square in Barbados in order to learn about Nelson. So the whole thing about removing history don't do anything with me. The guy needs to go completely.
I don't know why this is opened up for a referendum. I don't get it at all. This is a clear area that you can really show some dynamic commanding leadership and say, look, this is no longer something that we want sitting in our Hero Square in Bridgetown, because it does not reflect who we are as a people. Yes, he was part of our history, but we can find out from history and from different sources, and we can put Lord Nelson into a different place where if people want to come and take their photos with him, they can. But at the same time, I don't see why we should have to go through a referendum to figure out whether or not we want him moved. I just don't see why.
No.
Absolutely. I wish we had someone on here who disagreed, but unfortunately, they have me, and I agree.
We know you like balance, Phil. We know you like balance.
But I think the discussion. Sorry, I had a bit of a cough today. I think discussion should be more about what do we do to replace Nelson. And people always say, well, we can't get rid of history. It is not getting rid of history.
No, it's not.
We are making history
absolutely.
By charting a new change, by saying we no longer need to have this as a symbol of our past, but we need to have a symbol of our future, our collective future of where we want to go and where we want to head and what we want our kids to walk by and look up at. Because the truth is, there is power in statues. Not that we worship them as graven images or something, but they are symbolic, and they stand there as reflections on us of what it means to be great. This is what greatness looks like. This is what authority looks like. This is what leadership looks like. This is what conquering looks like.
Yeah.
And we need new imagery. We need to start a new narrative, and that
But
can
this-
come in the form of art and statues.
This goes back to what Nas said about education as well. It's about what are we educating ourselves about, you know, and what do we want future generations to be educating themselves about. You know,
Correct.
I would like to see 100 years from now, you know, folks talking about when we decided to stand for ourselves and chart our own course and remove, you know, the remnants of imperialism and colonialism, you know, from Hero Square. That's a brilliant thing that children 100 years from now should be learning about. You know, not the fact that, and it goes back again. I hate linking back to 1661, but it's when you know where things are from is when you can then make a thing to break
Informed
it.
decision,
You know,
absolutely.
Yeah.
but the fact that they are, you know, Afro-Indo-Bajans debating about whether Nelson should stay or not, it baffles me, and that's not to think that I am right, but it just baffles me, and it goes to show that the whole thing it worked.
But you've got Nelson's dockyard up by you as well, Naz, haven't you? In Antigua.
That's correct. But I was going to tell you that Trinidad went one better in the Spanish ambassador, because in Trinidad there's a statue of Christopher Columbus. And everybody was saying that, we need to get rid of Columbus because he represents colonialism and conquering and whatever it is. The Spanish ambassador to Trinidad said that he doesn't think that removing the statue will do anything. So we had that was a whole different ball game where a diplomat got involved in expressing his opinion, and nobody's saying that he doesn't have a right to express his opinion. But when it comes to something like this, it just goes back to solidify our point where we need to make our decisions for ourselves. Okay, you're a diplomat to our country, but you do not have this jurisdiction nor right to tell us that we should keep it because of such and such. That is the whole point of us wanting to get rid of it, because of your role in your country's role. I shouldn't say your role because it's not him, but who he represents, right, is our breaking away from that past and forging our own future. And funny enough, that Trinidad and Tobago national anthem, "Forge from the Love of Liberty," and then when you see this, and then you be like, how liberated are we if we can allow a diplomat to tell us how we chart our own course and our own history going forward from here?
Well, we've always got to pay very special attention to what these diplomats are saying, because they have a specific interest. And it's funny that you should raise that, Naz, because one of the other things that really caught my attention this week around this whole area of diplomats and those who are charged with representing us was an image coming out of Jamaica, and this was from Charmaine. And when I saw this, and for those of you who don't know what we have on screen here, this is an insignia that is worn by the Commonwealth Governor Generals who have been knighted by the Queen. So, our current Governor General, or the Governor General in Jamaica at the moment, Sir Patrick Allen, he would be wearing this. And it's an image of an angel standing on the neck of a black man who is appearing to be the devil, And when I looked at, there's a massive outcry with this in Jamaica because everything got raised. But the issue for me is, why did nobody see this before now?
Exactly.
How could I sat down and I thought of all the Governor Generals over the years that I could list off, and I was like, well, when you win a football medal, the first thing you do is just have a look and see what's on it. Well, I can't imagine that this insignia is being put around your neck and you're going to look at it and think that this imagery is actually appropriate. And to make it worse, he's now got to get approval from the Queen to get it changed. I was like, why?
And you want to know something ironic? To add to that, there was, I think, an article on Jamaican media. I don't know if it was online or on a newspaper. The ironic thing about it is that the photo that they used was the Queen presenting him with his credentials, which was that little thing in the box. And I was like, how appropriate is this to show the exact same thing that you're talking about? And Mark, that you mentioned this petition. I mean, I signed it because Trinidad is independent, so we don't have a governor general. But I mean, I live in a country that has a governor general. You all have governor generals there. Jamaica, several other islands
Yeah.
still under that, I would say, colonial rule because they're not a republic. But the thing about it is, like, my mom saw, because I signed the petition and then I shared it on my page, and my mom saw it, and then she was like, "What's this thing that showed up that I need to sign something? What is it about?" And then I explained it to her, and she was like, "Oh," I said, "Well, just as how you didn't know, I didn't know that that is what it looked like either."
Yeah.
And this is what it comes back to: educating each other
Yes. Yes.
about what is, what are these things that have been existing and what we need to get rid of if we want to have change.
No,
And you could go. Sorry, go on.
no, go ahead, Mark. I will come in.
No,
now.
I was going to say is you can even go a step further. Well, how could the Queen of England and those who are advising her could possibly think, across generations that this is appropriate? And when we talk about things being systemically wrong, people are just blinded to what they're doing because this is what we've always done and we just carry on doing it.
Correct.
But this again, I keep harping back. This is 1661.
Good.
And the years thereafter, because it didn't seem wrong, because the very same thing that affects us today affects them. So it didn't seem wrong. And over the years of that happening, and what Karen said there, unfortunately, we weren't paying attention. Well, the entire system was designed to eventually, we wouldn't pay attention. We would just accept it.
Correct.
We would accept our quote unquote place, and European Caribbean people would take their place.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that has permeated all the way through, even until now.
Funny that you should say that, the fact that we accept our place, because that has been what it has been from hundreds of years ago. Just last week, it was the anniversary of the Windrush
Yes.
Yes.
Empire Windrush arriving into the UK, and Prince Charles had a message talking about, oh yes, we acknowledge the contribution of West Indians and Afro-Caribbean people and Pan-Africanism, because people came from Africa to help restart the UK and all that kind of thing. And everybody was saying, okay, so what happened to the repatriations that are owed to people? And I think it goes beyond just money, but the fact is you need to start to change the mindset and
and the
these
system.
little
Yes.
things. For example, the insignia on that is one of the
Yes.
things that you need to start with, because
Yeah.
money is something that can ebb and flow, but that symbolism
Yeah.
will stay on longer than money would stay on, because you can get $5,000 now as a compensation for your family going through this, and you can blow the $5,000 tomorrow. And that
Exactly.
insignia on the Governor General's shield will still be there for 200 years to come if we don't acknowledge and change that. And my thing is, when, as you mentioned, the fact that the Queen is okay with handing this out or whatever it is, and I think it's because it's never affected them as much as Andre say, just how it affects us, it affects them. But the thing is, it has not affected them because it has not caused them to have
Yeah.
to change
Exactly.
their mindset
Yes.
and their lifestyle and their approach to it, that they will continue doing it because they have not had to put up with anybody being prejudiced against them or whatever it is. They're the creme de la creme as far as they're concerned.
Exactly. And because it worked. So they were able to live out the quote unquote privilege,
Correct.
even today. You
Yeah.
know, and that's where people got to get to the acceptance of, oh, this was set up so that I be here and you be there.
There. Yes.
And until until people get there with the conversation and recognize it's not me saying, so now give me what you got. That's not the
Correct.
conversation. That's not the conversation. It's like, no, a mindset change, and then you will see the system beginning to change.
Yeah.
And I think then you would see then the generations, after us, then beginning to come into a system that is fair and accepting to everybody. And that's when you will see the change start to go.
I mean, it's funny because one of the things that unites everybody, regardless of religion, race, wealth, whatever it is sports, right? And I think the fact that conversation of change has started within the sports industry, not just football, but cricket as well. I think I'm hoping and praying that that is a catalyst for change to come. And the ECB has said that, that they're going to look into having more black players represent England, and why hasn't black players represented England, in the past and currently. And it brings me back to something that Dwight York, who used to play football for Trinidad and Tobago and Manchester United, said. He said that black coaches aren't afforded the same chances and opportunities as white coaches in the English Premier League. And it's something that people have laughed at Dwight for decades about, oh, he coming about the same stupidness again about how black people, whatever it is, well, maybe he not qualified. But the point about it is, if I know that there is an opportunity for me to achieve something like that, I will work twice as hard to ensure that I'm qualified for it. But if I know that there's a stone wall, why would I waste my time to focus on that if I can make $1 in another avenue? You understand?
And Dwight, stopped playing almost 10 years ago. And
Correct.
it is exactly the same today. You got younger black players today still making the exact same point. And I think the challenge for us is, how can we focus on systemic change? Because until we can get the system to recognize, look, you see all these insignias across the Commonwealth, and you see the Commonwealth and the design of all this architecture, all of this need to be looked at.
Yeah.
Because we are in a different century. We are a different people, and we want a different type of existence. And until we can really start to drive those conversations forward, we will find that, people like Dwight will be repeating the same things all the time, but through different voices further down the generations, because nothing in the system is changing.
And this is really careful because, sorry, I was just going to make a very quick point. Because there are a lot of things happening that we might misconstrue as change. Okay, so in media, for example, there's loads of retractions being done of episodes like Tina Fey's episodes of 30 Rock.
With Gone with the Wind, they took down for a little while.
Yep.
Yeah.
Britain as well. A lot of these shows have suddenly started to retract. So there's a lot of noise in media about suddenly these things that we were laughing at 10 years ago are now inappropriate because of the current season. So one of the thoughts that I had there was, stop apologizing for those sort of things and stop retracting them as though you're trying to, rip up documents and that sort of stuff to hide history. The apology is really about what are the things that have not been presented, the full spectrum of what is the Black experience, the truth of it.
Yeah.
When we come to stuff like the insignia, this is not media. It's not a trivial thing. This is a statement of power.
Yeah.
And those statements of power are really at the core of systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that is itself reinforcing. This is the status quo. This is your position. This is my position. And we try to pretend and say things like, it's just an image. It's just a picture. It's just a statue. Yeah. That's a convenience to say that, right? So I guess, anytime we talk about race, I talk about the kids' book that I wrote, Nia and the Kingdom of Celebration. And that came on the back of me recognizing that I could not find any kids' books with Black characters that refer to them as beautiful, right? They're always referred to as resilient or strong or
well-spoken.
These sort of attributes, which are nice things as well. But beautiful is just such a fundamental character to have. There was Snow White, who was presented as the most beautiful girl in the world. And I remember when I started talking to people about this, some people said, no, that can't be true. But then as I searched, I found out it was actually true that a lot of the fairy tales and so on, and I wouldn't go as far as saying that they were purposely written for to sort of make black people and black girls feel as though they were not beautiful, but we were not responding in the right way, you know. But those sort of things have really caused a difference between our cultures. You know, there is one that has a position of beauty. This is what beauty looks like. This is what leadership looks like. And we are now kind of playing catch up in that sense.
Wow.
First off, it goes back to the image of Jesus. Jesus is shown as blue-eyed and blonde hair. But the fact that he grew up in an area where everybody was olive-skinned and whatever color hair, and something that has stuck with me from since I did A-level history. And my A-level history teacher, the ironic thing was he taught me we had to do European history and Caribbean history. And for somebody that taught me European history, one day he said that, you know, religion was used to control people, obviously. Well, I shouldn't say religion, but a lot of people use religion to control people.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which religion it is,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And he said that, you know, and it brought me back to the opening slide that you use where they said that if it is that a slave were to attack a Christian and, you know, the ramifications of what will happen, they use the line in the Bible that spoke about the woolly-haired people, and they were trying to show that the woolly-haired people were lesser people than people with flowing, wavy hair and probably blonde hair and blue eyes, right? And it goes back from that. And then when Philip spoke about imagery and all this type of thing, it goes back to show that, it's not something that can come about easily. And the fact that you have these images as representations of how it should be and what they suppose it is the truth. But until we move away from that, and for me, I've always had an issue, why do you have to have one person as the head of the Commonwealth, right? To begin with, the fact that we still have colonialism by the Queen being the head of state for various countries, I think that's a whole different issue. But I think territories need to start to look, if it is that they want true change, maybe that's where the change needs to happen, where you come away from that colonial rule. Because even though Antigua has their own national anthem, Barbados has their own national anthem, at the end of the day, at some stretch, you have to still sing God Save the Queen because she is your head of state.
Well, even things like the Commonwealth, you can argue, and I've argued it a long time ago, that it was actually used for Britain to keep its empire and to keep people a bit subjugated. Because the fear, going back to what Philip was talking about, bravery, but now talking from ourselves, the fear is to come out of that now. You're now definitely on your own, because now you can't benefit from the things that you get while you're in the Commonwealth, the quote unquote trade and access to funding and all these different things.
Yeah.
And that's really the fear. And even the insignia and stuff, you look at it, it was an angel supposedly standing on the devil with the different colors of skin. And again, that's why we miss it. And that I keep going back to way back when, because that's it incomplete, that's it at its completeness, when you no longer see it.
Yeah.
When it's all around you, you no longer see it, and you would actually argue for it and convince yourself why it is good and why it is what we must do. And that's why people, as you say, Mark, would have gotten the insignia, looked at it and go, wow, this is great. Pin that and move on. But it took a Black Lives Matter time or someone dying in 2020 for them people to actually see, but hang on, what's this I'm wearing?
Yeah.
And I can bet you $1 million it was someone else who drew it to his attention.
Oh yeah. Well, just the term Commonwealth. Commonwealth to who?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Who is all this Commonwealth common too. We don't see the fallout of it, do we? Now listen. I suppose the question for us is we said we want to start this as a journey. Phil, you mentioned, look, this is a conversation that's going to take some time.
Yeah.
I would love to reach out to other races across the Caribbean, to be able to. This isn't going to be the last of this conversation. And Naz, as our guest today, I wonder what your thoughts are as we try to go on this reconciliation journey. How do you think we can try and get people closer to having a conversation as opposed to keeping it within each sect? What are your thoughts?
I think people need to be brave, right? And I can use my example as being a woman working in an industry that is mainly male dominated. And the fact that I took the chance to say, yo, I just a skilled or sometimes even better skilled than you all to do the same job that you all doing. I think it's something that people have to have the bravery and stand up. Is no longer where I can have these conversations with my Indo-Trinidadian friends or my friends, my Afro-Trinidadian friends that I went to school with, and be like, well, yeah, I support you, right? But I don't think I can come out in public and talk these kind of things. So when Mark contacted me and said that, if I would be part of these discussions today, and I said, ask Mark without hesitation, I said, yes, right? Because the thing is, the conversation and the change starts with people like me who are not hesitant and who are not afraid to address the need for that change. And yes, people will be offended by it. Yes, people will have anxiety, as Andre said, about what is discovered and uncovered as we try to have this change. But in any situation, when you want to have change or you want a better situation, there's always going to be anxiety and uncomfort and discomfort. But it's how you use that to better the situation. It's as though you have a wound and it's been festering under a band-aid for the last 2 weeks, right? And you're getting all this pain from it, but you're afraid to go to the doctor until it reached to the point where you have to go to the doctor. When you rip it off, it have little things crawlies living inside it, right? And yes, you treat it, and going forward, you have a new piece of skin or whatever it is the same analogy that has to be used for this, and it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, particularly the race that you tried to get on your show today, and a lot of them back out of it. But it's something that they can't say, oh, we're progressive and we're a Caribbean people, we're Caribbean and we're Bajan or we're Trinidadian or we're Jamaican. Yes, okay, you are all of that. We are all of that. But we truly cannot be a Bajan or a Trinidadian or a Jamaican if it is that we don't face these issues head on, because it can't be that you suffering as a Afro-Bajan or Afro-Jamaican or Afro-Trinidadian, and me as an Indo-Trinidadian be lying down on my couch, enjoying some tea, watching TV, and know that your house on fire, but I wouldn't try to assist you. That don't make sense.
No.
That don't make sense. And in order for us to have this, we need to have more of this at what we're having here. We need to start a dialogue first. And it will start with the four of us, and then for everybody else that have been watching this live discussion can go back and tell their friends, oh, well, Mark and Nasira and Andre and Philip, they're having this discussion. Maybe next week they might tell 5 other people that will join into this discussion, and then it will be a domino effect where everybody. But the thing is, you're not to only log in and listen to what we have to say. You have to be part of the conversation as well. And this is where people this is how the change will affect. People need to become involved and educated more so than anything else. Because you can't want change if you don't educate yourself.
Beautiful. And listen, I am not going to leave it there, because I'm going to put the appeal out. We did try to get someone from white Barbados or white Jamaica or white Trinidad across the region,
and the OCS,
and the across the OCS.
We tried,
Wherever you are, and you might be watching this afterwards, come have a conversation. Come have a courageous conversation with us, because it is all part of the journey. And unless we have these conversations and keep moving forward, we're just going to be going around in circles and repeating the mistakes of history and letting the code continue to stay and direct how we navigate ourselves through our history. So,
Yeah. I was just going to say, I know before we talked about, we don't want to have a conversation with rules and parameters and that sort of stuff. I still believe in principles, having principles of conversation. And I go back to that biblical principle of being slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to anger. And I really want to have those sort of conversations where that's at the center of it, because I think that's the only way forward. The other principle that I'm starting to adopt, and the reason I'm saying this is I'm having a lot of these conversations in work at the moment, is this principle of converging on why. You know, because quite often we get these conversations about that happened. We talk a lot about the what happened.
Yeah.
Said what?
I'm
Who did
tired of
what?
those now.
You know, it's loads of blame tossing. We want us to converge on a why that we agree on, and say agreeing on why did things happen? Why are things the way they are? And know that we agree on that why, we can then have a conversation that spans from there. And that requires honesty, it requires empathy, and it requires a little bit of a thick skin as well, to some extent. And those are my principles.
I agree with your principles, as you know, in principle. You know, but I don't think we should be afraid of anger. That's
I
my
never said
view.
to be afraid of it. It says
I know, but I think to be slow too. I know,
Get
but
there.
I know. I hear you.
When you're at the beach, you know there's sharks in there. Don't be afraid of the sharks, but to be slow in walking.
I think I hear you,
Can't swim,
but and I can't swim either, so I would never see the sharks. But so you can't get sharks when you're sunbathing.
Yeah.
No, I think I agree with you. However, why you say you still gotta put that slow to anger or put slow in brackets is it all depends on where do you see the starting point. The starting point isn't now. So while you might see anger now, I don't think anyone was being quick to anger. I think this is just something that has been going on for so long that people are now at the point of saying enough is enough. So when I say I completely agree with you on being slow to anger, why I say that you shouldn't necessarily be afraid of it, not saying that you're saying that, is that personally, these conversations cannot be had and will not be had without elements of anger coming through. It's uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
And the starting point is different. And that's why, you know, I think you guys even, you know, heard me talk about, you know, where my pastor at my church, sometimes he would go, oh, I didn't know. That's not true. These things have been happening for so long. No one can come to this conversation and say, no, let's just start from now because I didn't realize what was happening. So please, can we now have a level-headed conversation? But guess what? There's another side that we've been saying for hundreds of years that this is a system that's been set up for, you know, that's caused to get here. So that's why I agree with you about slow to anger, but at the same time, personally, these conversations can't be had without it. And we need, again, coming back to your point, the bravery of everybody to come into the conversation, have the conversation. And Scott, I saw your point there about the long form, and you're right in that the conversation will ebb and flow. It may start here, it's gonna get there, but eventually if you keep talking, and I think that's the issue, is to keep talking. And we can't have people saying, you know what, I'm not even coming to the conversation, as we have experienced. The moment you have that and people just exiting the conversation, the anger is going nowhere and the conversation is going nowhere. So then when you come back 4 months from now and thinking, okay, let's pick it up from here. No, you're picking up from 300 and something years and now here. So we now can carry on. So that's why I think everyone has to have an open mind. Yes, Marika, saw your thing there. Everyone has to have an open mind. But just don't be afraid for how the conversation can flow. That is if you go into the conversation trying to achieve the same goal. If you go into the conversation trying to achieve the same goal, you're not going to worry about how it ebbs and flows. And if you get offended and what's not, you're not going to walk out. You're going to keep the conversation going because you want to get to the same goal.
But just to come back to that, my principles are not about worry. They're not about fear and anger. They're not about stepping away from conflict. It's really about, you need to have rules of engagement in that sort of precarious territory, right? Otherwise, it's not going to be progressive. You're not going to have a positive outcome. And again, if you're having a courageous conversation, you have to have an end goal that's a positive outcome, a mutual vision in mind that people are ready to tread these dangerous waters for, right? So, and that's the main point I want to get there. I saw Karen had a question there, but where does God come into the picture? and again, I know it's a very difficult conversation to have without God, and I know everyone is going to have a different perception of God, different perception of Jesus, a different perception of how faith plays out in this as well. But that one thing that God has given us that unites us all is love, right? And our conversations have to start from a perspective of mutual love. You have to add knowledge to where we are. We have to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to persevere. We have to get to a point of mutual kindness for each other. You know, if I say something that's offensive, know that there's a bigger, there's more to me than that word that I've just released about you. And that's the idea of having relational conversation and not transactional. Transactional conversation takes every output as the seed for fire. But a relational conversation says, no, there's more to you, and I want to explore that and get to know that. And that only comes with love. And that's how I think that acts as a sort of surrounding principle.
Beautiful.
All we need is love.
Yeah, I thought you were going to burst with and sound there, lads.
I'm sure we can make it happen. We can make it happen. So they said love is the key. That's another song. That's a Bajan song. Who sings that, Philip? I don't know.
Wendy
Love
Allen.
is the key. Wendy Allen. Oh, could I not that?
Yes.
She went to Alexandra. Just
Inside joke there, Nazi went there.
Well, I'm aware of the various school rivalries that you all have in Barbados. So when you all drop stuff like that, I know it's either Queen's College, Harrison, whoever it is. So carry on.
No, I think this was a really good conversation. I think, and it's good for us to have it and bring it out in open forum.
Yeah.
You know, because everyone is having conversations like these in their living rooms, no pun intended. But again, it's about having it out in the open and inviting others in. And inviting others in, you know, to use Philip's word, in love. Inviting others in to understand there's a mutual, what's the phrase? You know, there's mutual benefit for everybody if we have these conversations or go along this journey to reach the same end. You know, to reach the same end of truly everybody being equal and operating and within the same space and breaking down something that has been systemic for hundreds and hundreds of years, and even in today in popular culture still shows that it is still systemic in some of the things that we do. We look at the insignia, we look at the music, we look at everyone removing images now out of the different TV shows and what's not. So which means that something that was set up 1661, we talk about Barbados. If you look at, you know, Afro and European relationships, you look at that, and in 2020, the fallout from that still prevails today. Not just from the perspective of the quote unquote victim, but from everybody. The fallout is there. And if we eradicate it, if we are able and willing to go back and understand where it came from, have a conversation, and then put in place actions to break it down, then I think we're well on the road to being in a better place, so to speak. So Naz, thank you so much for joining this conversation. we know everybody loves you, so everybody give Naz a shout out. I thank you for coming here, and I say that not the thing because you express your views with exactly what we were saying, with bravery, and not afraid to step out, and you're always just saying what's on your mind and being open to have the conversation, and I really appreciate that, and I'm sure our audience appreciates it as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're most welcome, and there's always a saying that be the change that you want to see, and I think each one of us have to actually live that out in order for us to achieve anything, because we can't do it separately. We have to do it as a collective to make our voices heard and get that change. And I'm hoping that everybody's situation with COVID will change just now. So hopefully I can see you all in the UK in the near future.
Come. You need to come up. Definitely.
Yeah. We look forward to that for sure.
Definitely. So thanks again for joining us, Naz.
Anytime, man.
All right. Yep. Thanks. Okay, guys.
Wow.
Good conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, it's funny how sometimes you can end these conversations in such a different place to where you started, because I was really annoyed, was probably the best way to frame it at the beginning, because of how we didn't get who we wanted. But I think this was really good to start the conversation around race relations and kind of establish where we are and get some input from Naz, someone who is living the journey and living it out in a way that is very authentic, that people can relate to and understand. So it's been very, very good for me today, actually. Yeah. Really, really good.
Glad you said the word start.
Yeah, because listen,
the conversation is
this will take time.
Yeah.
So I think our audience needs to realize that if they see race relations in the Caribbean again as another conversation in the living room, they will know it is evolving. We're moving forward.
I think, I agree with you there, Mark. And I think actually it's incumbent on us to keep it going.
Yeah.
Because I think far too often, like, you hear people saying they're having conversations and then they disappear, and you know that nothing has really happened. But I think it's incumbent on us, to use this platform to have the conversation continuously and out in the open. And hopefully, people would join in and be part of that conversation, because really and truly, this, we're not going to get anywhere if everyone isn't willing to talk. And I use the example of what happened in South Africa and Uganda and Zaire and Eritrea and different places, who came out to real serious ethnic cleansing that was really, really, really bad. And, and within years, they were having the conversation openly, having the anger moments, but then they reach a resolve. And you see where a lot of those countries are coming now. And I think in the West Indies, it's long overdue. That conversation, long overdue, and we shouldn't let up until it happens.
No.
Yeah, given that we've just discussed a lot about, a lot of this structural stuff was constructed within Barbados itself. Could it be that we are at the epicenter of deconstructing it as well?
But that's my thought. And that's why I keep harping back to 1661, because I know we have many Bajans in the audience here that are watching, and we need to understand our place in that. So it is actually, again, incumbent upon us,
new export.
As Bajans and the West Indians, as West Indies, because it was Barbados and then it went to Jamaica and different parts of the Caribbean and then went to the US. We shouldn't be looking to the US to start this conversation. You see how difficult that is happening. They're not in a place. But we exported it. I say it's incumbent upon us. Actually, that's a good point, actually. Even more as I think it through. And that's why even, Caucasians in the Caribbean should actually actively take this up.
Yeah.
Because you can argue that, this is, don't get me started, but you can, one can argue that this was your first export to the world.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. And you should want to take ownership in helping resolve it and take a leadership voice in it.
Yeah.
And take the lead in actually resolving it.
I heard a wonderful quote a few days on a podcast that said, anyone who says that a small voice does not make a difference has never shared a bed with a mosquito.
Okay. True.
I thought that was so significant. You know, if you have a mosquito buzzing around, it's a small, insignificant, or
Can't
seemingly
sleep.
insignificant thing, but you cannot sleep. You cannot rest
Yeah.
until you know that mosquito has been taken care of. And even these conversations we're having might seem like a small thing. I mean, even issues like the insignia might seem like a small thing, but we can't rest.
No.
That insignia thing has really inspired me, because
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts in my head that I'm probably going to vocalize over the next couple of days. That really has inspired me to look more carefully at how things around our region are being so easily absorbed,
Yeah.
and how we just run with them without carefully recognizing the impact that they're having on our psychological well-being.
Well, this is why, from us, we talk about systems needed to change, but even our Caribbean systems need to change. I mean, Mark, I think it was you who brought up in a previous conversation. We all grew up watching Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
I had to play a car with the Confederate flag. Philip, I know you were playing on the piano. You didn't really watch the Dukes of Hazzard, right? you know, and the thing is that that was us, a television station run by our people,
Yeah. Buying it.
given our history, that had that TV program running. Our cinemas played the movie a few years ago when it came out without fully understanding or caring or thinking, actually, and even worse, if not caring, or actually thinking that it doesn't mean anything. I go back to 1661. That means it has worked perfectly. Even today. Forget the bruises and the lashes. Is the bruises and lashes that in our minds are the things that have actually taken much longer to heal than the ones that were on our backs.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm hoping that this conversation will no longer be the elephant in the room.
I noticed you keep positioning to make sure everyone can
Everybody
see.
can see the elephant.
No, it's
He was
just
waiting for that sentence. He was.
it's also if I go in this position like this, it looks
Yeah, you got two big ears, man.
You got 2 ears.
I was trying to say that, I guess.
No, seriously, no. That was a good conversation and a good start to many conversations to come. Look, everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us for 2 hours. We know it was a difficult conversation, but one that we need to have. One we need to have amongst ourselves, and one that we need to widen the tent and bring others into the conversation and have honest conversations about our history, where we are now, and where we want to go. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about us as Afro-Caribbean people or Afro-Americans. I mean the world in general, because the world, for me, is one, and we need to be able to move forward as one and not in this segregated way of how we've been doing for so long. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us, and for continuing to join us. I looked through and I saw some people that we always see quite a few times. Pep, I saw you said you joined late, but I saw you come in. Brenda, I saw you join in there as well. So, Scott, thank you for joining today. I saw you commented also. Welcome. Hope you keep coming back also. And we saw some others, and we saw many people. And we just want to say thank you for continuing with Be Global and the Living Room in this journey. And we'll continue to have the conversations that need to be had right across the region, and just have them openly, honestly, and sometimes we have a laugh, and sometimes, who knows, in the future we might have a little cry, but that's all right. We're going to have the conversations. So guys, thank you for joining us.
It's good.
Well done.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. More to